I think a lot of the music just isn't up to standard myself. I think there's 3 good songs on it, and I think the rest is rather weak.
Part of that is... Hello?
There's something uniquely fascinating about artists turning against their own work. For those of us on the outside, these albums often seem like towering achievements, works that have shaped careers, defined eras, and in some cases, made an indelible mark on culture. But for the people who actually created them, some records are less a source of pride and more an enduring source of regret. Over time, musicians have been unflinchingly candid about their creative misfires, sometimes blaming external pressures, personal demons, or just sheer bad luck. It's not always easy to admit when something you poured your heart and soul into just didn't land, but when it comes to the music industry, self-reflection, especially of the brutal kind, comes with the territory. Ozzy Osbourne, for instance, has never been one to sugarcoat his feelings, and when it comes to Black Sabbath's Never Say Die, he doesn't hold back. I was completely checked out, he's admitted, and frankly, it shows.
I was stoned all the time, and so I didn't really appreciate what was going on around me.
By the late 70s, the band was, to put it kindly, running on fumes.
We were doing too much, and we got to too much of a state that we couldn't function,
What should have been another milestone in the dark, doomy legacy of Sabbath instead turned into a chaotic mess of conflicting styles and questionable decisions. The blues-infused heaviness that made them legends had been diluted by increasingly ill-advised experiments, including a baffling embrace of jazz elements that no one, not the band, not the critics, and certainly not the fans, knew what to do with. It's never a good sign when your lead singer can't be bothered to finish the album, and in Ozzy's case, his apathy was so palpable that drummer Bill Ward ended up singing the final track. Ward, bless him, has a decent voice, but when your legendary frontman is essentially tapping out mid-recording, you know you've got a problem. Meanwhile, Eminem has spent a significant amount of time publicly atoning for Relapse, his 2009 comeback album that arrived after years of personal struggles and a lengthy hiatus. On paper, it should have been a triumphant return to form, an opportunity to reassert his dominance after the misfire that was Encore. Instead, what listeners got was an oddly sterile and frequently bizarre collection of tracks featuring Eminem's now infamous serial killer accents. The accents were ridiculous, he later admitted, wincing at his own vocal choices.
I don't have a problem with some of the rhymes, and I don't have a problem with some of the verses as far as lyrically.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the accents, I felt like I sounded so demented in that shit that I got cemented in that shit.
In his mind, the album suffered from overcommitment to a concept that simply didn't work, resulting in tracks that veered between unsettling and unintentionally comedic. In hindsight, it's easy to see why he's not exactly rushing to revisit songs like We Made You, which sounded less like a return to Slim Shady's razor-sharp wit and more like a parody of his earlier work. James Hetfield of Metallica is another musician who has been forthright about his frustrations with past efforts, particularly the much-maligned Load and Reload albums. "We could have made one good record instead of 2, he's remarked, a sentiment echoed by legions of fans who were baffled by the band's sudden embrace of bluesy hard rock and introspective lyrics.
Load's clear here at the bottom, so we need to load up a little bit if we can. Twist it. Hey, my bitch.
What else? What's good on
Bleeding me.
Bleeding me. Yeah, we'll do that tonight.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
Cool.
In the eyes of many, Metallica had strayed too far from the raw aggression that had defined their early years. It didn't help that the band's new, slicked-back image, complete with short hair and designer clothing, was met with widespread derision. While both albums contain a handful of solid tracks, even the band themselves have acknowledged that they were bloated affairs in desperate need of an editor. Then there's Eddie Van Halen, whose distaste for Diver Down is legendary. The 1982 album was essentially cobbled together at the behest of the record label.
Well, there's actually half cover tunes and half our own. And the critics have been giving a shit about that. But I think it's a bunch of crap.
Who saw dollar signs after the band's cover of Oh Pretty Woman started climbing the charts. Half of its covers, and the originals are half-baked, Eddie later grumbled, and it's hard to disagree. While there's a certain charm to Van Halen's irreverent take on classic songs,
Are you ready for me? Summer's here, and the time is right. Our dancing in the
the record ultimately feels more like a collection of odds and ends than a cohesive artistic statement. Eddie, a notorious perfectionist, was understandably frustrated by what he saw as a missed opportunity to push the band's sound forward. Instead, he was left with an album that felt more like a contractual obligation than a genuine expression of their musical identity. Stevie Nicks has long been candid about her struggles with substance abuse, and nowhere is that more evident than on Street Angel, an album that she has all but disowned.
I've been walking under rainbows too long to tell.
Released in 1994, the record was plagued by behind-the-scenes turmoil, with Nicks battling a crippling addiction to prescription drugs and enduring a fraught working relationship with producer Glyn Johns. The result was an album that lacked the ethereal charm and mysticism that had always been her hallmark. "I was a mess," she's confessed, and it's painfully evident in the music, which often feels sluggish and uninspired. Unlike her earlier solo efforts, which crackled with energy and a sense of artistic purpose, Street Angel felt more like a weary sigh. MF Doom, the enigmatic figure behind countless underground hip-hop classics, also found himself at odds with one of his own releases.
I used to cop a lot, but never cop no drop. Hold mics like ponytails tight and bobble up.
Venomous Villain, released under his Victor Vaughn persona. Known for his intricate wordplay and masterful production, Doom's usual meticulous approach was conspicuously absent from this project.
I don't really listen to the current hip hop to the point where I know who is who.
In his own words, "I just did it for the advance," a brutal admission that confirmed what many fans had already suspected. The album lacked the cohesion and attention to detail that had become his trademark, feeling instead like a rushed cash grab designed to satisfy a contractual obligation rather than an artistic impulse. Mick Jagger, never one to mince words, has been brutally honest about his feelings on Their Satanic Majesty's request, the Rolling Stones' ill-fated attempt at psychedelia.
Satanic Majesties? If I got criticism of the Rolling Stones, that is, and myself, because I think it applies to me as much as anyone, that they're a little bit cautious.
The band had seen the Beatles conquer the world with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and rather than carving out their own lane, they opted to dive headfirst into swirling soundscapes and whimsical experimentation. "It's a load of rubbish," Jagger later remarked, and it's not hard to see why. While the album does contain a few gems, 2,000 Light Years from Home being a notable standout.
Track? 2,000 Light Years from Home.
The overall effect is one of a band trying desperately to keep up, rather than forging their own path.
Satanic Majesties, I think more things have been taken just from the word satanic, It was just a play on words after all, Britannic, satanic,
Right.
Dark satanic meals. There you go. People are always going to think the Rolling Stones are satanic, no matter, even when I get me harp and me wings, to prove them wrong.
Even George Harrison, one of the most consistently reliable members of the Beatles, wasn't immune to the occasional creative misstep. Extra Texture, released in 1975, found him in a state of creative exhaustion following the mammoth success of All Things Must Pass. "I was just going through the motions," he later admitted, and the music reflects that fatigue. While Harrison's songwriting talents were still very much intact, there's a noticeable lack of the spiritual depth and emotional resonance that defined his best work. When it comes to Pink Floyd, few albums divide opinion quite like The Final Cut. Originally conceived as a follow-up to The Wall, the album was dominated by Roger Waters' increasingly authoritarian grip on the band's creative direction. "It's just Roger, really," David Gilmour later remarked, expressing his frustration at the lack of collaboration and creative input from the rest of the band.
Roger had one idea of how he thought the album should be, and a very strong idea of how he wanted it to be, and I simply thought he was wrong. He didn't want me to continue producing it because it was not achieving anything. It was just, my opinion was so different that it was just being counterproductive. So I stopped working on the production of the album and left it entirely to him. I said, well, you go ahead and do it, finish it.
The album's heavy-handed political themes and somber tone make it a challenging listen, even for devoted fans. While it contains moments of brilliance, it ultimately feels like a one-man show rather than a collective effort.
I find its tone a little too complaining for myself personally, but personally, I don't like it very much. I still think that the way I wanted to do it would have been a much better way of doing it.
And finally we have Paul McCartney, who has spent decades trying to make peace with Let It Be. The album, meant to capture the Beatles in their rawest, most unfiltered form, was instead transformed into an overproduced spectacle by Phil Spector. He overcooked it, McCartney lamented, pointing to the syrupy orchestration and grandiose flourishes that smothered the original simplicity of tracks like The Long and Winding Road.
You left me waiting here a long, long time ago.
You like standing better?
Well, yeah, put weight in there and standing here.
So it would be...
You left me waiting here a long, long time ago. Don't leave me standing here. Lead me to
I adore Ringo.
Yeah, he's just right.
Yeah, but also very good in the heart too, I think.
Feel the most relaxed around me.
Me too.
There's no more to that yet. Just call that middle.
In an effort to set the record straight, he later spearheaded the release of Let It Be, Naked, which stripped away the excess and offered fans a glimpse of what might have been. Ultimately, these albums, while often regretted by their creators, still hold a place in the hearts of many fans. They serve as reminders that even the greatest artists are fallible, capable of making decisions they later come to question. And perhaps that's what makes them so enduringly fascinating. These records, flaws and all, are a testament to the messy, unpredictable nature of creativity. After all, music history would be far less interesting if everyone got it right the first time.